and welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 123. Today we're going to be talking about photographing fungi or mushrooms, toadstools, that kind of stuff on the forest floor, and why actually sometimes using your phone can actually be easier or give you better results, handier results than using your big old DSLR. I'm also going to be doing critique on 4 different people have sent in images, so we're going to be looking at that, giving some feedback to their photos, and yeah, I think I've got time. I'm going to show you a quick little trick in Photoshop for how to create lighting up glowing mushrooms. Some of you may have seen these kind of things before. It's actually surprisingly easy if you've got the right editing software, so I'm going to show you a little bit of that as well. So here we are, live on YouTube, unless you happen to be watching the recordings. And if this is your first time to seeing me on YouTube, or you've not done so already, please do subscribe. Somewhere down bottom left corner of here, or bottom right corner, there's an option to subscribe. Click the little notification bell so you know when the next bits are happening. There's also, if you enjoy these podcasts, find them useful, entertaining, and you would like to support them in some way, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is another way to do it. And if you also haven't done so already, but you belong to Facebook, there's a Facebook group also called Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, where you can submit images for critique, get a little bit of feedback. Sometimes I do a question of the week, kind of a little bit of kind of socialising, if you like, in between podcasts. So yes, if you are watching live, then leave me a comment, say hello. We can chat. You can give me feedback. You can ask questions and all that. And I can see we've got a couple of people in already. Pat is saying just fair today in Somerset and a little bit nippy, and certainly feels like it's temperature's dropped a bit. There's definitely a bit of a bite in the air today. DMN63 says hello from New Galloway. Rain on its way, more shrooms for me to photograph. Well, DMN63, let me know your name. Give me I don't recognise the handle, but New Galloway is literally just up the road about 12 or 15 miles, so local. Have we met before in person? Let me know who it is I'm talking to. Maggie says, hello all. Feeling chilly today in Castle Douglas. It is indeed. Meg says, hello everyone. Rosemary says, good morning everyone, because Rosemary's coming in from Washington State and Pacific USA, where it's only about 7 o'clock in the morning, I think. Nadia says, hi everyone. And Rosemary also goes on to say, I'm so pleased to hear the topic is the topic today. I love getting photos of forest mushrooms. Excellent. Okay. John Harvey says hello all from Ohio as well. Great. So we've got people in. We've got topics to talk about. So let's make a little bit of a start. So what I wanted to talk about really was the notion of photographing. Oh, Robert's here as well. Says howdy all from Texas. Oh dear men, hi, sorry, I'm Duncan. Duncan, yes, we met very briefly at the D&G Awards a few years ago. We did indeed. I do remember it well. Well, at this point here, I should probably hand over the podcast. You've got a much better, in fact, because I seem to remember you won an award on your mushroom photography. I'm not talking today about award-winning photography, but this is as much about trying to give people ideas on what they can do. So this is the time of year, if you happen to be in the Northern Hemisphere, or most of the Northern Hemisphere, as we kind of come towards the end of September, it is mushroom season. It's getting damper, it's getting colder. The forests particularly tend to be kind of, the fungi is sprouting and blooming all over the place. So what are the options then for taking the photos? Well, of course, absolutely, it's a time, if you've got the camera and you've got a good macro lens, to go out, head into the woods and try and find some interesting mushrooms and toadstools. Now, one of the problems you always have is the fact that there's nearly always ones with bites out the side or bits that are falling apart. Trying to find a good specimen isn't always that easy. But then you don't necessarily have to have a good specimen. Sometimes I think there can be an overemphasis on getting the perfection, whereas actually sometimes it can be really interesting getting the texture and stuff of decay as well. So let me show you a few photos, a couple of options here. So, for example, now what I really wanted to talk, now you can do I show you ones which I've taken with a DSLR first, or do I show you ones taken with a phone? Let's show you ones with a phone, I think, just kind of for the fun of it. So let me flip over here, and what I want to no, not that one, not that one. Where are we? That one, yes. Sooner or later, I'll figure out which buttons to press properly. So here we go. So this photo here, then, so this was taken with the phone. Now, the great thing about the phone, in fact, actually, let me just flip it back here. The reason I'm talking about using a phone rather than necessarily using the camera is because very often when you've got your okay, let's grab this a sec. So when you've got your great big heavy DSLR, sometimes if you're actually at ground level and you stick this on the ground and then you're trying to get your eye down to kind of see what's going on, sometimes you can kind of get really sort of, well, either an earful of dirt, or sometimes it's really difficult to try and get down. Now, if you're lucky and you happen to have one of these things where you've got like a kind of flip out screen type thing, that certainly makes life a lot easier, because then you can be literally, you know, above it, looking down into your screen and sort of making adjustments like that. So that's handy. But of course, not all cameras have those. And certainly, I mean, this is my new one, you know, the 7D that I've been using for the last 7 years hasn't had that. So it's always, or you're kind of turning the camera upside down, you've got it on a reverse tripod and you're trying to really get things low. It can be an absolute pain. However, the thing is about these things, your mobile phone, is you don't have to have it that way. You can have it that way. And when you look now at the lens, lens over here, and how close that is to the ground, you are literally millimeters from ground length. And that allows you to get your thing right down at ground level. And in this case then, so if we flip back over to here, you can see I'm actually underneath the mushroom. I've managed to get so low that I can tilt it slightly up and you can get all the gills and everything, as well as getting forest in the background. So you can get, and I just think this is brilliant. I absolutely love this. Now, I wouldn't say at this point, with this particular phone, you're not going to be getting award-winning photography. This is a particularly old phone. This is 5.5 years old. So I desperately need to get around to upgrading it. But pretty much, if you've got a modern phone which is, you know, generally speaking, say less than 2 years old, you don't even have to go on to the kind of iPhone 13 levels. But most of them now have got astonishing levels of auto exposure, auto focus, image stabilization, and a whole bunch of AI algorithms within it in order to adjust the lightness and contrast and everything else, so that when you get it down, you're actually likely to get quite a good quality photo just using the auto settings. Now, obviously, there's always a point whereby some of us are going to want to go beyond the auto settings, but what I love about these things is it's an entry into, and that's really what this talk is about today. I mean, Duncan really has created some amazing photographs, and Duncan, if you want to leave a web address or an Instagram address or something in the comments, I would recommend anybody to go and take a look at some of the amazing photography that Duncan has done. But for the rest of us, there's the entry point. There's the how do we start doing this kind of stuff? I'm no expert on this, but but the fact is you can still apply all the things we've been talking about. The notion of lighting, the notion of composition. I mean, in this one, clearly kind of rule of thirds. The other problem that you do have, of course, is the fact that if you're, generally speaking, on the forest floor in the woodland, it can be quite dark. And so what I've done actually here is I've got a torch. So, a little pocket torch, something like this, is amazingly powerful. These little LED lights are amazingly powerful. And you just sort of sit one of these on the side and you can light it up. So you can see what I've done here is I've got I've actually stuck, in fact, let me just, I think I did, yes. I stuck a torch. So you can see the torch here coming down on. Now, what I've also done here, this was done for a slightly different photo, and I'll show you that one in a minute, was I put a couple of little orange gels over the front. And what this allows it to do is to give it a slightly different colour scheme. And actually to show you, now this one wasn't done with the phone, this one was done with my macro lens. So you can see that you've then got this kind of almost sunset kind of feel to the picture. So as well as just kind of adding a light, you can add coloured lights. A little bit of, if you don't have proper coloured gels or anything like that, I mean a little bit of cellophane that you get off candy wrappers, sweetie wrappers, is another way of doing things. But so to do something like this, then you know, just sticking a torch on, when you come to here, it's managed to give it that just that extra bit of light, which has allowed the phone to focus a little bit better with it. Now I will just say at this point, if you've got any questions, you've got any comments, you've got any bits that you want to sort of add into, you know, do leave comments, and periodically I will kind of come in and check and talk a little bit more about them. So to run on them with a couple more. I mean, another kind of fun photo here was, let me show you. So here's another one where, quick shot just to show you the setup. Here we've got a nice little semi-eaten mushroom, little toadstool kind of pushing out here. But again, because I can get the phone really low into it, I'm able to sort of get underneath it, and you've got all this incredible texture of the gills and what have you. And because I've got the torch shining under it, we've managed to lighten it up, and it's quite, you really gotta get that feeling of this whole other world, these whole kind of other universes that exist down on the forest floor, you know, a million miles away from sitting inside a comfy house, getting on with our living. So this kind of thing, I think, becomes really fun. And then you can even end up with things like, let me show you this one here. Now, here's a setup. What we've got here is, I don't know how well this is coming off, but we've got a dip going down. There's like we've got a bit of a tree coming down on the left, and we've got a bit of another tree or rock or something down on the right. And it's a mossy area where it's actually really narrow. And the narrowness drops down. You can see there's a mushroom down here, or a toadstool down here, with a little bit of web running down to it. Now, under normal circumstances, I wouldn't be able to get my my camera down into this space. But by leaning over and dangling down my phone camera, I was able to get, where are we? This. So you can see I'm using that torch as a backlight. Remember, we've talked an awful lot of the time that when you get a backlight, it can really kind of add something a little bit magical. And now I'll just narrow that slightly so you can just see the fact that the light is coming up from the corner up here. Third, because I suddenly realised that's my head sitting in the way of the picture. So something like this, then again, it kind of creates that almost like a little bit of sunshine just hitting the edge here, creates a little bit of backlight, allows some of that detail to come up. But this little bit of space, you can see the narrowness of this space was really kind of just too tight to properly get my camera into. But the phone, good old phone, you can kind of dangle down, turn a little bit. It's a little bit of fussing about, but hey, you know, that's what we do with cameras. We fuss about a lot with them. So I thought I would just show one. So that's really kind of what I wanted to show you. So there's times when really, if you're trying to get out, if you want to make a start with, if you want to kind of an honest introduction to woodland mushroom fungi photography, get out there with your phone. Your phone can get right underneath the mushrooms in a way that you can really struggle with your DSLR. Use a torch. Use a torch to add some light onto it. And then if you've got a bit of cellophane from candy wrappers or sweetie wrappers, or even, you know, or something else, put it over the front of the torch. You can get coloured lights, and you can kind of start adding in other little bits of fun. Now, if you do happen to have a DSLR with a macro lens, again, this is where, you know, just showing up here, you can get some really nice close-up things. And here you can see again, torch here with the gels just leaning on the front, and you can get in. You can start playing around with kind of coloured lighting, what have you. There was this one that I showed you just a little bit earlier, where again you're showing up the gills. This one, I mean, I know it's got bites out of it. Again, I quite like it. I think it's kind of fun. There's often too much emphasis on the idea of the perfection of the mushroom, but I quite like the kind of decay bit sometimes. But then there's the classic, and it took you can hunt for years, I think, to try and find a nice red mushroom with all the white dots on it. Again, not absolutely perfect. We've got, you know, a little bit chewed out the top there. I moved around a little bit until I could find, you know, the majority of this. Again, what we do have though is I've got the torch coming down from the left with a little orange gel on it, which means that the light, the kind of pale light over here, that's actually the woodland light. That's because we're quite close to the edge of the woods, the edge of the line of the tree. So this is daylight coming in from this side, and then, like I said, I've got an orange gel over on the left side, sitting over the torch to take it here, just to give it a little bit more colour. And then you can play around with it. Find a stray twig. This twig here, for example, was just sort of lying slightly flatter. I just pushed it up a bit, and then we end up with this nice diagonal kind of coming in. So all the compositional tricks that we've talked before about, you know, things again like here with rule of thirds, but also use of diagonals, use of leading lines. So using the twig as a diagonal leading line pointing up towards the mushroom helps give us that kind of thing to play with. So hope that gives you a little kind of bit of an introduction to the idea of woodland mushroom photography. So, okay, couple of questions here, or comments. What have we got? Robert says, oh, by the way, how is the R5 working out? Yes, that's the the new camera, and I'm starting to get the hang of it now. I've managed to, it's not tripping me up so much, and I am starting to find that it's working. I've still got to explore a lot with it, but I'm finding that I'm getting better quality of pictures more often now. There's always this thing when you change your camera, you upgrade your camera, you get a better camera, and then actually your pictures get worse because you're less familiar with all the tech, and you've got to re-familiarize yourself, and you've got to create new settings and all the rest of it, and until you get the hang of it. And so I found this every single time I've ever upgraded my camera, that the quality of my photos has dipped before it started getting better again. However, I am noticing that the quality of the photos that I'm getting is better, and it's allowing me to do things that I couldn't before. So, for example, I'm aware that the R5 is better in low light conditions than the 7D that I used to work. But yeah, so thanks for that, Robert. What else have we got here? Oh, Maggie says beautiful textures. Karen's here, says cold grey day in Shipley. Meg says, I really like the details in the forest and the lovely texture of the mushrooms. And Rosemary says, beautiful collection of images, makes me eager for the fall rain to get out and to get out our local fungi growing. Cool. Okay, so that's a little bit of fun. Like I say, have fun with it. I mean, fine if you can get out with your camera. You know, the lighting system in the woods is always going to be darker. Take a torch, take coloured gels. Be prepared also to find a solid place to rest your camera. If you're worried about your camera getting damp, have a little pad of some kind that you can stick it on. Tripods if you're photographing fungi in trees. There's lots of ways to explore. Having said that, just a quick heads up, I'll talk a little bit more later, but I'm going to set a seasonal change challenge for 2 weeks' time, which might involve, which it's up to you if you want to go out and try a little bit of woodland forest fungi to enter for that. But there will be other options, so I'll talk a little bit more about that in a short while. So other thing I wanted to show you was the idea of, I promised you that what we could do is, some of you may have seen, I keep sort of seeing these things cropping up every now and again, where people have created mushrooms which seem to sort of glow in the dark, a kind of sort of fairy tale idea. And so what I'm going to show you here is, so the way to do this, now this isn't taken with a phone, but you could just as easily, as long as you keep everything absolutely steady. What you do is you take 2 photos. So here's a photo of mushroom, forest floor, just kind of ambient light But then what I also did was I took the torch and I put the torch over above it, and putting the torch above it created this wonderful glow in the gills. So what you can do then is, in fact actually tell you what, let's just cancel that a sec, and we open up Photoshop, and I'm just going to quickly do this just to kind of show you the kind of thing you can do. So I'm going to drag both of those photos here into Photoshop. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use this one as the base one. Duplicate that layer just so we've got something to play with, and I'm going to go to Camera Raw. Lightroom has similar kind of set, but what essentially I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to color shift this. I'm going to shift it out of the yellows and into the kind of blues to create a kind of more moonlight feel type thing too. So I'm going to shift it into the blues, and what I'm also then going to do is I'm going to darken it down somewhat as well. Let's go get vignette, stick a vignette on the outside as well. So that's maybe kind of, the blue is very blue, so I think what I might do is take this vibrance and just drag that down a bit, kind of keep it blue, grey bluish, something like that. Okay, so we've got that effect. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it on here. Now it doesn't line up absolutely completely. Now I'm going to kind of do a half and half here, so that as I can move this round, what I'm going to try and do then is I'm going to try and line up this mushroom with the one above. Now I've managed to, it's kind of that. If I could Control T that and do, I could just tilt it a fraction, something like that. Get it up there. Overlay that here. It's really tricky. It's not going to be absolutely exact because I think the moss got squidged slightly when I was leaning on it. But if you're doing this properly, what you would do is just make sure that you get two photos. You have your camera set at absolutely, so you run two photos completely together, one with the torch, one without, where you're not wobbling anything. But again, like I say, this is just an introduction to. So I'm just going to lighten that up, and then what we'll do is we'll just crop this in a little bit, something like this. And then now that lines up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask this layer. So that's covered off. And now I can go to paint. Having masked it, I changed this over here to a white thing, and then I can just literally start painting it. I'm just going to paint under the gills here. So what I'm doing is I'm revealing the torchlit layer selectively. And so by doing this just on the gills, it's allowing just this bit to lighten up. And so by blending the two photos together, it's allowing us to have this kind of effect. Now, there are ways of doing, you can spend a lot more time on this and get a lot more detail and play around. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the opacity of that to so about a third to 30%, something like that, and then just start to allow it to kind of slightly kind of come down the. And then if what I also maybe want to do just to kind of is maybe kind of get a little bit of glow on the sort of inside of the moss and stuff here, on little, especially on the kind of edge catch lights and stuff like that, and it kind of then feels like that light is just spilling out from underneath and sort of lighting things up a little bit. And I'll just switch that back there. I'm going to take out that little bit. So take that back up to 100. I just want to take out that little bit at the back there, which I feel is making it look like the light's coming from behind rather than from through. And there we go, something like that. And immediately it now looks like you have this kind of mushroom which is glowing and spreading a little bit of light while sort of sitting in the dark. If I wanted, I could just maybe darken down. Let's drag that up. So I'll go to the curves, pull the whole thing down, darken that background a little bit more, and then again go back to the mask and just swap that over to black this time, and then just kind of lighten that up a little bit, something like that. And there we go, a little bit of fun. So you could it's just one of those effects. Whenever you type in mushroom photography, sooner or later you start to find that somebody's doing something with these kind of glow effects. So I'm guessing some of you may have come across that before, and if you've ever wondered how you do it, that's the kind of quick and easy way of doing something. So hope you found that interesting. Right, okay. Peter's here, says, hi from Hunmanby in North Yorkshire. Formerly lived in Kirkinner in Dumfries and Galloway. Glad you could make it along, Peter. So, right, okay. That's mushroom fungi. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the critique section. So the critique section, this is your chance to send in images and ask for feedback. There's not many places on the internet where you can get genuine feedback on your images. So this is one of those places where send me your images. Either you can put them into the Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, or if you don't do Facebook, you can email them to me. My web address here is kimayres.co.uk. Just simply put kim@kimayres.co.uk. Email me the image and let me know what your sticking point is. Let me know where your problem lies and I'll do my best to help. Excuse me. Right, okay, so this time we've had 4 different people. Oh, and just to remind you, stick around because I'm setting a... Well, actually, let's just talk about this just now. I'll remind you again at the end of the podcast, but next week I'm not going to be around. Maggie Meg and I are all heading off to Whitby in Yorkshire for a week away, and on the Saturday we're driving down. Sunday we're going to be there. I don't have all the computer set up to be able to do this. The following, so on the 2nd of October, no podcast. The 9th of October there will be. But what I'm doing now is I'm going to set a challenge for the 9th of October. So if you want to take part, get your images into me by about, well, ideally about the sort of 5th, 6th, 7th, you know, the Friday, the Saturday the 8th at the absolute latest. But the challenge is going to be seasonal change. The fact is, like I say, here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's autumn. Autumn is making itself felt, and certainly into the beginning of October, and up in Scotland, and today is this cold, dreary kind of very autumnal day. Leaves are falling off. Now, it doesn't have... I'm aware that for some people, you know, Jackie in South Africa is Southern Hemisphere, so it's spring down there. Viji in India doesn't have autumn, winter, but does have wet season, dry season, rainy seasons and what have you. So, and I think we're kind of starting to border on the edge of that. Wherever you are in the world, there's the notion of seasonal change. So I'm happy to accept pictures of seasonal change. So if you don't happen to be in the Northern Hemisphere or wherever where you're getting a kind of autumnal change, show me your images from some kind of seasonal change from where in the world you happen to be. But for here, mostly, if you think about autumn, we have the colours of leaves changing. We have leaves falling off. We have the growth of mushrooms and fungi. There's weather patterns where things, you know, maybe you get your first frosts. There tends to be an abundance of fruit. Harvest festivals are very often around this time, precisely because you've got all those kind of the autumn berries. You know, a couple of weeks ago, Meg and I were out picking the brambles, the blackberries, apples. You know, trees are now becoming laden with apples. So fruit, leaves, trees, mushrooms, weather patterns. There's a huge amount of possibilities for interpreting this idea of seasonal change. So what I really want you to do, and I have a think about this, and you've got 2 weeks. I'm giving you the 2 weeks here. So if you don't have a chance during the week, you've still got next weekend. You can get out with your cameras or your phones or your tablets and take your photos. Edit them however you want to edit them and put them in. There won't be a critique section. It will just be looking through the photos and handing out smug points, I think, for anybody who feels that, you know, send us an image and we're looking to inspire everybody else, to show people what we can do. If you really get kind of unstuck, or you know, if you take a photo and you think, I kind of feel I could have done something better with this, but I'm not sure what it was, or I missed this, or you want a little bit of advice, then you can ask and let me know. But primarily, it's not really going to be a critique section. It's going to be much more a case of a showcase for how you have decided to interpret the seasonal challenge brief. So look forward to seeing what you're going to put in with that. I'll remind you again at the end of the podcast about that one. So that will be in 2 weeks' time. Nadia said, I've seen someone use a canned smoke to give a foggy effect with fungi photography. Yeah, that's another one. If you want to kind of create that mist effect, if you've got little smoke bombs or smoke pellets or something like that, and you want to sort of create mist effects, you can. Or if you've got fog in a can. No, I've not come across that one. I'm going to have to go and Google that, look that up. That sounds like it could be a lot of fun. Certainly, I've got a smoker in the party with you, perhaps, or a vape. I actually have done that before. I was with somebody who used a vape, and I needed a smoke effect for lights behind somebody just briefly, and we got them to vape and blow out this big puff of smoke behind the person's head. So yeah, there's options to do that if you want to kind of create a little bit of extra atmosphere. Okay. Having said that, like I say, we'll remind you again at the end of the podcast. But now what we're going to do is going to move on to the critique section. And actually, Nadia here. We'll start with Nadia. And Nadia sent in... she said, going on this week's podcast, here are some pictures of woodland fungi. These were my first attempts. It would be nice for your thoughts on them. So... Nadia pasted into the Facebook group Understanding Photography for Kim Ayres. She put in 4 photos and then asked for a little bit of feedback. So this one, nice colouring, and you can see we're kind of getting in there. This one feels sort of slightly oversaturated, I think, looking for textures, which is always good, but without doubt this one is the standout photo of the photos that you've got. And I think this is a really nice one, Nadia. And because this is working on several levels. First of all, you've got the focus exactly right. So we've got lovely texture coming out of little bits of moss on the rock here, but then where this bit of mushroom is broken off, we've got wonderful texture in the gills. So there's fantastic texture coming out of that. And again, it's back to that thing, you don't have to have the perfect mushroom, because actually sometimes you get much more texture out of the bits where bits are broken off. It's nicely done with that kind of off-center rule of thirds-ish. We've got this part here. The stalk of the mushroom is running up here. So we've got a diagonal, we've got a leading line, rule of thirds but also nicely this sits out, because it's a shallow depth of field, this sits nicely out against the background. There's no interference, it's not too busy, the background is still softly textured, and I really do quite like this sort of light patch running down in the background. We don't know what it is. It could just be a bit of light hitting a bit of tree or moss sort of behind the picture, but it adds that little bit of texture. It's not complete black. So without a doubt, Nadia, I think this is your standout photo. This is the one where you've kind of pulled together the elements. These other ones, that's an interesting texture, but it's kind of a little bit all over the place. We're less sure what's going on here. This one, we can see the mushroom. You're doing the rule of thirds bit. The yellows feel almost acid. The greens rather. I mean, they're quite acidic there. I think there's a bit of kind of overkill with the processing. This one, again, very bright, colourful, possibly oversaturated. A difficult thing here, trying to get the focus on the right. It's a very narrow depth of field you've got. You've got the top of the mushroom in focus, but the bit that's closest to us isn't. And that which means there's a large blurred area on the thing, which doesn't quite get there. Although I do like that little bit of web coming down on the diagonal, I have to say. But without a doubt, I think this is the one where you've managed to get everything together. So, hope that helps, Nadia. Gives you a little bit of feedback on that. So, next up, we're going to talk about Viji. Viji's obviously not managed to make it along yet. Usually here on a Sunday, but she'll have to watch the catch-up. But Viji says, I took these photos of my mother recently for a competition. So now Viji sent in a set of 4 photos. So what we have here, let me talk. This is 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the fact is they were sent in for a competition. Well, let me tell you what Viji says about it. I took these photos of my mother recently for a photo competition in my country in storytelling mode. So the fact is what she was asked to do was to create a set of photos for a story. So this is a move, it's a slightly different kind of thing than usually. When we come to creating photos, most of the time we're creating standalone photos. And certainly when we're doing photo crowd type photo sites, then, you know, there's Photo Crowd or Guru Shots or Viewbug. These online sites, generally speaking, you're showing one photo at a time. But sometimes there are competitions where what you're asked to do is to show a series of photos, and the series of photos then need to tell a story. So it might be 3 photos, 5 photos, 10 photos. In this case, I think there was 4. And so so I thought this could be quite interesting to just sort of briefly talk about, is that notion of, if you are going to create a set of photos which have a story, then not only has each photo got to look good on its own, it's got to relate strongly and clearly to each of the other photos. So she goes on, so this is my mum who makes a garland out of jasmine flowers, later styling. So here you can see she's making the garland. Down here we've got the flowers being strung together. Then she makes puts the garland into her hair. Finally lighting the lamp, and so then she's lighting an oil lamp ready for a ritual, and then she's praying. So this is her usual routine in the evenings. Kim, it would be lovely if you could pick out some photos from here and let me know how good it is in a narrative style, and could it be bettered while photographing. So we've got the 4 photos. We've got the making the garland, putting the garland into the hair, lighting the flame, the oil, and then saying the prayers. So what's holding all these together is the fact that it's Viji's mother, who's appearing in all the shots. And then we've got a colour scheme. We've got a colour scheme because she's wearing that beautiful gold and green sari that appears all the way through. So we've got a consistency. And that's the key thing about when you're doing a sequence of photos for a photo story, is that you have a consistency that runs through them all. Now, having said that, there are different levels of consistency where I think you can kind of improve on. Now, one of the so colour scheme becomes a consistency, but also I think there's a notion of there are certain elements and how much of the space they occupy. So again, in this case, so Viji's mother is occupying probably taking up about a quarter to a third of the picture. You know, that if you were to sort of measure up the number of pixels in which she appears, you're talking about around about a third of the picture. In this one, again similar, but we've gone from body shot to head shot. Then again, similar, kind of about a third, quarter to a third, but now we're kind of upper body shot. We've got head and we've got shoulders, and then this one was also about a quarter or so, head and shoulders. So in terms of the amount of space that your mother is taking up, that works well. Although I think this sort of move from we've got 2 which are kind of head and shoulders and upper arms. This one which is just the head close in on the back, and this one which is more of a kind of, we've also got the waist and the knees and most of the body. I think there's another thing here whereby if you're really trying to hone this idea of the story, then what you want to do is you want to kind of move it into the fact whereby you're essentially using the same part of the body. Now, you might decide to use head and shoulders all the way through, or you might decide to concentrate on something like the hands. Now, With this one, although she's stringing the garland, we've got a picture of her, but I will say that part of the problem here is most of the garland is missing, and her bottom hand isn't in the photo here. And I think there's a part of me that really feels that if you wanted to create a consistent, powerful story, one of the best things you could do is to take something like the hands, and then if you were to do a shot whereby you had both hands in, and the hands were taking up the majority. So you could see here in this one, she would be stringing the garland. But you get a point whereby the hands were a little bit closer together and you could see the jasmine flowers. Then at that point, something like this works quite well, where again, but maybe you would nudge her over to the right a little bit because again, the left hand is missing. You've got the reflection and the reflection's out of focus. There's a little bit over on the right here which isn't giving us anything. This photo in itself would have worked better if everything had been shifted slightly to the right. But in terms of the hand shot, then you would have had the hand and the fingers and the garland in the same kind of composition almost, but certainly the same amount of space given over to the hands and the same kind of detail and attention to detail as if you'd zoomed in to do the making of the garland. Then when you come to this part, you could have likewise done a kind of a zoom in more on the hands here, where it's then about the hands and the lighting of the flame. And then of course that takes us on to the last one, where we then focus on the hands and the position of the prey. And I think something like that is likely to feel much more a consistent story. The only other thing I would say about this is the notion of the lighting, Viji, is that the lighting feels very harsh. I don't know whether you're using a flash or you've got, but it's a very strong light. It's a hard light. You see the hard shadow coming from behind. I think a softer light would be more interesting. I think would allow you to kind of bring out more texture. And so if you had a softbox, if you had some kind of material over the front of your light to diffuse the light so the light was softer and the shadows were a bit softer, I think that could be more interesting. Again, if you decided to concentrate on the hands, you can then play around with black and white as well, which I have to say that a lot of competitions, if you're talking photo competitions, close-up hands, texture, black and white, you're pretty much onto a winner. A lot of them are like that kind of stuff. So the thing with these photos then, Viji, is I think you're definitely onto the right track. You've created a story, you've used your mother, you've got the consistency, you've got a colour scheme that runs through, you've got a story. But I think if you're really trying to kind of up that storytelling to the next level, then what you need to do is you need to have a consistent... Now, your consistency is either in something like the hands, or the consistency is in something like the head and shoulders. And so we have... there's a head and shoulders here, there's a head and shoulders here. This one, you would need to be pulled back a little bit more to get more of the head and shoulders in there. And with this one, again, you would want more of the head and shoulders. But also here, to make it more clear what she was doing, you might have asked her to maybe bring to be stringing the jasmine flowers on in front of her face to kind of get that sense of what's going on in the picture. So it's going to be a strange thing. It's never going to be complete documentary. There is going to be a bit of stageness in there, but there is anyway. Your mum's helping you out here. She knows you've got the camera there. She knows you've set up the lights. So you may as well kind of enlist her help a little bit more to kind of arrange where those bits are likely to be. And then within that, like I say, try and go for a softer light, I would say. And then your usual rules of composition apply. Where you're looking for your leading lines, shadows, things like that. So I hope that helps, Viji. I hope that gives you some thoughts and ideas for that. Okay, John says on the first photo, the crop through the right hand is a bit bothersome, but I really did like the last photo. And Pat says, I love these photos of Viji's mum. Okay, excellent. Right, so what we're going to do now then is we're going to move on to Rosemary. And Rosemary was photographing her cat and says, this is a photo. So here's a photo of a cat in the window. So this is the unedited version. She says, this is a photo from several years ago that I always liked, but I felt lacked a little something. I thought I'd try editing it to see what I could do with it and would appreciate your feedback on the editing. So this one shows our kitten Swiper, who was sitting at the windowsill, pining after some birds in the trees outside. It was backlit, coming through his ears, but it was the backlight coming through his ears that first caught my eye. So yeah, as we talked before, backlight's always quite amazing, and we get this lovely kind of halo effect and the little texture of the little bits of hair and fur on the ears, which is definitely, yes, I can see why it's catching your attention. And then I noticed the reflection. So here we go, we can actually see the reflection in the window as well, and decided to compose to include it. I like the reflection, but it's quite faint in the original. And also noting that this was all taken in JPEG. This was before Rosemary started shooting in RAW, so that kind of limited certain editing options afterwards. So with the editing then, she increased the saturation of the kitten. So this was her second attempt here. So she's cropped in a bit and boosted the saturation so that the reflection starts to stand out a little bit more. On top of that, it looks like sharpened the texture a little bit. It's gone from soft to a much kind of, sharpened up the texture. But does it also make it too pronounced? So I raised it, she goes on. I also raised the texture slider to make the window screen more obvious. I don't know if this is beneficial or not, especially given that I've cropped out most of the curtain. I did not want to keep the window environment. Also, by increasing the texture, the farm dust is much more visible on the screen. Is it too distracting? I've used the healing tool to remove the biggest dust spots, but there are definitely still many left. The texture tool definitely makes them more visible. And this is true. This is one of those problems that if you increase the texture, generally speaking, unless you are masking it off in particular places, it increases the texture across, and then any little bits of dust, which might have been quite soft and barely noticeable, suddenly become heightened and exaggerated. She goes on, after typing out these questions, I realise I've over-edited my personal tastes. So going back and easing off on the edits makes me more satisfied. So then she's gone back and she's edited again. And so you can see, I don't know if you can go from there to there, you can see she's softened down a little bit. So many times I've heard the recommendation to take the sliders to where they make a noticeable difference and then back them down a little bit. I think it's true in this instance. It's proven to be true. I think in this instance it's proven to be true, at least to my own taste. I suppose the difference of the two edits probably won't be apparent on small screens, but on my desktop, the second edit with softer reflection seems to accomplish the goal of making it more pronounced without feeling forced. Thank you for your feedback. Well, at this point, in a way, what's happened is Rosemary has managed to answer her own question. However, to come back to this, let's kind of run through this a little bit, because I think there's a couple of other things that you could do. First of all, I think you're absolutely right. There is this thing whereby sometimes when we are editing, we move the sliders a bit and we go, oh, that's interesting. And then we move the sliders a bit more and we go, oh, that's interesting. We move them a bit more and we go, oh, that's interesting. And each time we're comparing it to the last bit. But then if you go and compare it to the original, suddenly it seems like we've really gone too far and overcooked. So this comes back to this idea, I think we were talking about this just the other week, where if you take a photo and then you edit it, it's quite often a really good idea to leave it a day or two and then come back and take another look at it. And does it still look good, or does it still look a bit overcooked? And should you soften it back down again? It's very easy to just go a bit too far with the editing. So what I am going to say about this, though, is there's a couple of other things I want to talk about. Let's go back to your original unedited version, and we'll just open that in Photoshop. I'll just close down the... and now it's funny, look at this, and this now looks really over vibrant, and I will possibly soften the colours a little bit. Having said that, you want bright colours if you're going to be in these online voting competitions, but part of me tends to now feel this is just kind of a slightly overkill, having left it for 20 minutes while we talk about other things. Anyway, to go back to Rosemary's picture. So duplicate that layer for a moment. And so first of all, we play with the crop, And you're right, there's no point in having all that stuff off to the right. So we come over here a bit, pull that down, and we crop it down. Now, what I'm also aware though is that the reflection of the kitten, remember we've talked about the notion that gaps get exaggerated in photos. And here, I mean, when you're looking at the kitten and the reflection from the notion of the room, you're taking in all the curtains over to the left, all the screen to the window to the right, plus whatever other curtains and all the rest of it. This gap between the kitten and his reflection is only going to be taking up about 5% of your vision. But here, when the gap is going from this point to this point, we're taking up about 25 to 30% of the vision. So that gap feels really quite exaggerated. So one of the things I'd be kind of really quite tempted to do is if I'm going to copy that and paste this on here and then actually move it over a bit, something like that, close that gap down. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask it so that because at the moment what we can see is we've got a solid line where it hasn't, but just by masking and then a soft brush, just feathered, so turn that, I can just kind of take this bit out and just soften that back in so it doesn't look quite as obvious. And then at that point we can, maybe, well, I don't know, we can either, because we kept part of the, because we kept part of the background, we can either kind of feather that back in like that, or we can crop it a little bit further in if we wanted to, maybe something like that. So now what we can see is we've got the picture of Swiper and his reflection, and now the reflection feels like much closer. In fact, it almost really does look like we've got a younger cat looking up at a slightly, smaller cat looking up at a slightly bigger cat here. Now, the next thing I want to talk about here is kind of slight color balance here. I'll select all that and put it all together into a top. So if I go into filter, camera or filter, I think what we could do is you could shift the balance to blue, kind of, but we've got a lot of green in here, and I think you could kind of nudge into the purple. Now we don't want to go too much, but I think just nudging into the purple just to kind of counteract some of those greens a bit. You could even nudge a little bit into the blue, something like that. Soften the kind of overkill of the background a little bit to allow the sort of reddishness of the. Now, if I want, I can nudge the vibrance up and now. I don't want to go that too much, but just a little bit, just to kind of bring out a little bit more richness back in the fur. So it's subtle, it's not a lot, but I think immediately it actually does allow the little reflection to stand out a touch more. Other things you could do, you could play with curves. We kind of darken things down a bit, lighten things up a bit, sort of something like that. That's really exaggerating this, but maybe it's gone too far with the coat, in which case, again, you could mask, unmask this bit and allow some of that to come through. So let's take this up here. Now, other things we can do, you can go to there is a temptation when you've got fur like this, where what we really want to end up doing is pulling the texture up. And as you say, and what happens here is when we pull the texture up, it does allow, in some ways, much more of this to sort of stand out. However, as you say, it kind of makes the dust spot stand out somewhat as well. But there's also a bit here where I think there's a problem. We've actually lost the softness of the fur. The beautiful thing about cats and young cats is the softness of the fur, and you want to be able to feel that softness. And in a way, what we want to do, I think, is almost take it the other direction. So having just undone that, if I go, actually, I'll tell you what, let's, hold on, let's go back to here, history, redo that. But what I'm going to do is come back to the step, no, I just, yeah, that's it. So here we're going to go back to the stage before the sharpness. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the camera raw here. What I think we can also do actually is bring the shadows up somewhat, so we get a little bit more of the fur. And then instead of moving the texture bar to the right, I want to bring it down to the left a little bit. And we're essentially softening some of that fur and allowing the silkiness to come through like that. Now, again, it might be slight overkill on everything, so I might want to just mask that off and then just gently paint that in, something like that, and allow the softness of the fur there. Maybe soften down the cat. No, I think we're kind of fine with the cat there, the reflection there. And I think then at this point what we've got is we've got that really sort of soft thing. So if I just take that, bring that down to there, and sort of down to there, and group that, then what we can see is we've gone from that to that. So your reflection is standing out more, and the cat is able to, we've managed to sort of get the softness of the fur. So something like that, I think, is kind of where you want to go. That your original colour scheme, I think the green is kind of overpowering, and I think that's that little nudge the purples into it slows that down a bit, little bit of contrast, but also getting the softness of the fur. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives you a couple of ideas there, Rosemary. Okay, couple more comments on here. What do we have? Robert says, I would find that the background's a little distracting. You can mask it out. Rosemary says, I wondered about the gap. Thank you for addressing it. I prefer the way you've closed it up. Okay, cool. Okay, finally then, what we're going to do now is going to move on to Robert. And then what I will do is I will remind you again about the contest. That's sorry, not a contest, a challenge that's coming up for 2 weeks' time. And so what Robert has done is Robert has sent us in this photo of koi. Is it koi carp? No, it's koi anyway. Says, we missed last Sunday's podcast because of the Dallas Arboretum and Botanical Garden with the Dallas Camera Club. I didn't take many pictures there. I don't find plants that interesting yet, but I did photograph koi. I found it very difficult to capture moving fish due to the most difficult image. I found it to be the most difficult image to get due to the movement and the fact that there is a surface barrier between the fish's eye and the camera. Autofocus does not work very well. That's a really good point. If you've got water and your autofocus is really going to struggle to know where to latch onto. If you've got reflective surfaces, not to mention the fact that these things can be swimming quite fast and moving about quite a lot. Even using bursts, I found that most weren't in focus or were focused on some uninteresting part of the fish. I've attached what I think is the best shot. I spent some time in Photoshop editing to make it look better. I have different crops as well, but I settled on this one for the critique as I didn't want to overwhelm you. Thank you. Also, if you decide what a different crop is better, chances are I have one just like it. Okay, so we've got koi in the pool, we've got them moving about, coming up for, they're not coming up for air, but they kind of come up for food. Interestingly, we had Nadia, no, it wasn't Nadia, it was Nikki, just in the comments here. She wasn't putting in anything for critique, but did throw this picture into the comment on Robert's entry of this into the Facebook group and said, this was, you could feed koi for $1 or something like that, throw food into the pool at a local place. And what this shows you here is just how chaotic it can be. First of all, everything's sort of slightly out of focus because they're moving too fast for the shutter speed that Nikki's got, but also they're pointing off in 100 different directions. And so there's nowhere for you to really properly latch your eye onto, and all the leading lines are shooting you out of the picture rather than bringing your attention back in. So to go back to Robert's picture here, this is a really nicely composed picture. We've got the we are drawn straight to the eye of the fish. We've got this one coming down here, but with the curves of the ripples also kind of keep us within. You've also vignetted, I think, around the edges. So you're using that trick of using essentially barriers on the outside to draw the eye back into the photo. There's the potential for this to as a kind of leading line taking us out of the picture. But by darkening it down a little bit and by having the curve of the ripples helps us to bring it back in. So that works quite well. What I would say though, Robert, is I feel like you've cropped it slightly off too much to the right. Now I'll come back to that because, well, okay, let's open Robert sent me the original, which always makes it a lot easier. As you can see, here's the original unedited version. And let's just open that as is. And what Robert's done is, with the crop, is he's brought this down to create this rule of thirds bit where we can see the right on the kind of 2/3 of the way, or third of the way in from the right, third of the way down, straight onto the eye, because that's considered. However, I feel there's a slight trick missed here, which is when we look at the tail of the koi. So if I undo this, there's a nice shape to that. Now you might, fair enough, if we try and get the whole tail in, we end up with kind of too much space on here, but I think you could pull that down to something like that. Now this eye doesn't end up as exactly on that kind of third, but I think it's okay. You don't have to be, rule of thirds is a guideline, it's not an absolute. As long as you're just that off center, I think that's kind of close enough. But what we do have then is we have a little bit of, this line comes up around here and then catches this sort of diagonal on the corner, which I think is quite pleasing. So with that, I think that in terms of a crop, it's not much, but I think it gives you just that little bit more, Robert. Now, what Robert has also done then is, he's done quite a bit of editing to it, but you know, at a very brief thing, if I go to curves, pull that down, push that up a bit, that kind of gives us a little bit more kind of where he's gone. And so that's that. So by darkening the darks, but with the curves over on the right here, let's just do this again, show you what's going on. If I, the bottom part of this down here is the shadows. As I bring that up, sorry, so let's remove that. I can make the shadows lighter, I can make the highlights darker or lighter, or I can make the shadows darker. And what you do is you have, but I can also grab part of this and pull it down or push it up and go for the midtones. And if I go into the sort of bottom left, bring the shadows down a bit, but then I've darkened the highlights a bit too much, but I don't want to take the highlights too much because I then blow them. So what I do is I just bring that back up to the line where they came from there. Now I've managed to kind of darken and richen a little bit. Now again, but are the colours slightly overcooked? If you felt they are, then at this point you can go to your hue saturation and just nudge the saturation down a little bit to kind of create something slightly more naturalistic. Having said that, again, what we've talked about with some of these kind of online speed voting competitions, like sometimes that little boost of colour is going to help make your image stand out. And just a wee reminder on this, that there's the difference between who you're putting these pictures in front of. If you're going for an online kind of crowd voting situation, then fine, boost the colours a little bit because they stand out against the 400 other photos they've just looked at in the last 60 seconds. If you're printing it up and you've got judges looking at these things one at a time, then actually that's going to feel a bit too oversaturated. So bring the saturation back down a bit, make it a little bit more naturalistic. So that's kind of really all I wanted to now. So that's what I want to say about in terms of the composition. But the other thing that you were talking about was the problem of struggling with the focus. And at this point, now when I look at what you did with this, what's interesting is you're using a really narrow depth of field. You're something like 1.2, f1.2, which is giving you a tiny depth of field. There's only a little bit that's going to be sharply in focus, and everything drops out of focus very, very quickly. And I think that's where you've sort of shot yourself in the foot a little bit. I think you could easily go a little bit bigger, or even if you went to 2, 3.5, 5.6, would give you a deeper depth of field. And what that means is that there's more movement where it's going to be in focus. So when we look here, for example, where's the sharp bit? The eye here is just starting to go out of focus. It's more in focus just here where the mouth is breaking the water. That's probably our sharpest part, and we're starting to lose it here. Whereas if you had an aperture of 5.6, 6.3, something like that, then not only are you going to have the water breaking that, the mouth part in focus, but you'll also then definitely get the eye in focus. You're going to have more depth of field, which is going to give you a better hit rate for getting the eye in focus, because you're absolutely right, the eye has to be the key point that's in focus when you're talking about something like this, because it's the bit that we look at first. But to get the eye and the mouth in focus, you want a deeper depth of field. Now that might mean, now you're at a 400th of a second on your, which is fast, but maybe you need it fast because these things are moving around at quite a speed and you don't want movement blur, you want to be able to capture them. So, as we saw in that picture of Nikki's, where they're flying about all over the place, your average kind of 125th of a second or even 200th of a second probably isn't going to capture them where you want. So 400th of a second is fine, but you're also on an ISO 50. You're on a really, so you've got a lot more room there. You could, and certainly the camera you're using, ISO 200, ISO 400, possibly even ISO 800. You've got potential there, and add that with a little bit of noise reduction in Photoshop editing, and you could easily go to an ISO 400 and probably quite easily go to an ISO 800, which would allow you to then have the deeper depth of focus with an f5.6 and f6.3, something like that. So for your technical level, the way to do this then is to have a deeper depth of focus, a narrower aperture, and allow yourself to go to auto ISO. And I think you could get away with it. Now the other trick here is to come off the autofocus and go to manual focus. And manually focus on the water surface and then focus just a fraction below it. So you will need to play around a little bit, but manually focus it, because you're right, the autofocus isn't necessarily going to know what to latch onto. Then what you've got to do is you've got to time everything. If you know these carp are coming, these koi are coming up and breaking the surface, and you're wanting to get that little bit of the eye just beneath the surface, then that allows you to focus fractionally below the surface, and then it's there ready for when the koi comes up again. So on your auto, go to auto ISO, but come off the autofocus and manually play with it. So that's kind of what I recommend there. So I hope that gives you a couple of ideas to play around with there, Robert, and solves a few problems. Right, okay, so what have we got here? Couple more comments. Robert says, I think the non-submerged fish photography has to be the most difficult photography there is. Well, it's the most difficult you've come across so far. And Robert likes that crop. Susie says, hello from Tasmania. Finally made it to your live show. Welcome to Susie. Must be early hours of the morning for you, pulling a late night, so I'm glad you could make it along. Robert says, I use the f1.2 due to the low light, but if I had a torch, I could have got better depth of focus. That's possible, but like I say, I'm looking at this, you've got a 50 ISO. So there was enough light. Like I say, if you went to a higher ISO setting, I think that would really work for you. Okay, and you're happy with the feedback. That's good. Have a great vacation with the family. Thank you. Rosemary says, I'm impressed you were able to capture the koi. You were able to get the koi hold still long enough to capture your image. Well, it was 400th of a second, and I think it was high speed burst is one of these things you can do as well. And Meg really likes the colour of the fish. Cool. Okay. So, thank you to Nadia, to Rosemary, to Viji, and to Robert for sending those images in. Hope everybody else found those bits of feedback useful as well. So, to remind you that next week there won't be a podcast. Episode number 124 is going to be in 2 weeks' time on October the 9th. But what I'm doing then is in 2 weeks' time, I'm setting the seasonal change challenge. So for us in the Northern Hemisphere here, we're coming into autumn. So autumn means or fall if you're over in North America. It means changing colours of the trees and the leaves. It means the explosion of fungi. It means fruits like the apple trees are now getting to that point of being laden. It means changing in the weather patterns. Very often you get mists or you get the rains. If you're in the southern hemisphere, like Susie here down in Tasmania, it's spring. Spring now, seasonal change. This is a time when life is coming out. You're getting all the buds, you're getting all the blossoms. You're getting the first growth pushing up through the earth. If you're kind of more equatorial, there will be places where you'll be getting the rainy season. The wet season will be coming in. All around the world, there's seasonal change going on at this time of year. We've just immediately passed the equinox. We're going to be coming into October. And so this challenge is for 2 weeks' time. So if you're busy during the week, you still have next weekend to go and create something, to find something. And find something which really excites you. Play around, get different ideas, and then submit your images. Either if you're on Facebook, go to the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook page, stick your photo in, tell us a little bit about it. Tell us what it was about the image that you've caught that excited you. If there's any interesting bit of story, you had to overcome any particular difficulties in order to grab it, tell us that as well. Because I think when we're sharing these images, this isn't about critique in 2 weeks' time. This is about sharing the enjoyment of taking a photo to fit to a brief. And I think the stories behind the photos can be fun as well. If you ended up getting soggy feet, if you ended up having to overcome a particular kind of problem, then let us know. I think it all adds to the fun of it. Make sure you get your images in by Friday the 7th of October, Saturday the 8th at the latest. And then in 2 weeks' time, what I'll do is I'll put these together and we'll go through the photos and hopefully we'll have a bit of fun together, share the experience, get inspired by each other, and I'll hand out the smug points wherever possible as well, or wherever deserved. So that's pretty much us, I think. So yeah, have fun, enjoy the next couple of weeks, enjoy getting some seasonal change photos, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with. And Susie says only a bit after 1 a.m. here. Okay, well, if you're happy staying up to 1 a.m. then that's great. Hopefully see a bit more of you, Susie. Right, take care and enjoy the next couple of weeks, and I'll thank you for coming along. Cheerio.